This is the conclusion of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, Part 3. On the following day, the first clear sign of danger appeared. Three armed tribesmen approached and asked what the boy and the alchemist were doing there. "I'm hunting with my falcon," the alchemist answered. "We're going to have to search you and see whether you're armed," one of the tribesmen said. The alchemist dismounted slowly, and the boy did the same. "Why are you carrying money?" asked the tribesman when he searched the boy's bag. "I need to go to the pyramids," he said. The tribesman, who was searching the alchemist's belongings, found a small flask filled with a liquid and a yellow glass egg that was slightly larger than a chicken's egg. "What are these things?" he asked. "That is the philosopher's stone and the elixir of life. It is the masterwork of the alchemists. Whoever swallows that elixir will never be sick again, and a fragment from the stone turns any metal into gold." The Arabs laughed at him, and the alchemists laughed along. They thought his answer was amusing, and they allowed the boy and the alchemist to proceed with all of their belongings. "Are you crazy?" the boy asked the alchemist when they had moved on. "What did you do that for?" "To show you one of life's simple lessons," the alchemist answered. "When you possess great treasures within you and try to tell them, seldom are you believed." They continued across the desert. With every day that passed, the boy's heart became more and more silent, and it no longer wanted to know about things of past or future. It was content simply to contemplate the desert and to drink with the boy from the soul of the world. The boy and his heart had become friends, and neither was capable now of betraying the other. When his heart spoke to him, it was to provide a stimulus to the boy and to give him strength, because the day of silence there in the desert were wearisome. His heart told the boy what his strongest qualities were: his courage in having given up his sheep and trying to live out his destiny, and his enthusiasm during this time he had worked at the crystal shop. And his heart told him something else that the boy had never noticed. It told the boy of dangers that had threatened him, but that he had never perceived. His heart said that one time it had hidden the rifle the boy had taken from his father because of the possibility that the boy might wound himself. And it reminded the boy of the day that he had been ill and vomiting out in the fields, in which he had fallen into a deep sleep. There had been two thieves further ahead who were planning on stealing the boy's sheep and murdering them. But since the boy hadn't passed by, they decided to move on, thinking that he had changed his route. "Does a man's heart always help him?" the boy asked the alchemist. "Mostly just the heart of those who are trying to realize their destinies. But they do help. Children, drunkards, and the elderly too." "Does that mean I'll ever run into danger?" "It means only that the heart does what it can," the alchemist said. One afternoon they passed the encampment of one of the tribes. At each corner of the camps were Arabs garbed in beautiful white robes, with arms at ready. The men were smoking their hookahs and trading stories from the battlefield. No one paid any attention to the two travelers. "There's no danger," the boy said when they had moved on past the encampment. The alchemist sounded angry. "Trust your heart, but never forget that you're in the desert. And when men are at war with one another, the sound of the world can hear the scream of battle. No one fails to suffer the consequences of everything under the sun." All things are one, the boy thought, and then, as if the desert wanted to demonstrate that the alchemist was right, two horsemen appeared behind the travelers. "You can't go any further," one of them said. "You're in the area where the tribes are at war." "I'm not going very far," the alchemist said, looking straight into the eyes of the horseman. They were silent for a moment and then agreed that the boy and the alchemist could move along. The boy watched the exchange with fascination. "You dominated those horsemen in the way that you looked at them," he said. "Your eyes show the strength of your soul," answered the alchemist. That's true, the boy thought. He had noticed that, in the midst of the multitude of armed men back at the encampment, there had been one who stared fixedly at the two. He had been so far away that his face wasn't even visible, but the boy was certain that he had been looking at them. Finally, when they had crossed the mountain range that extended along the entire horizon, the alchemists say that they were only 2 days from the pyramids. "If we're going to go our separate ways soon," the boy said, "then teach me about alchemy." "You already know about alchemy. It's about penetrating into the soul of the world and discovering the treasure that has been reserved for you." "No, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about transforming lead into gold." The alchemist fell silent as the desert, and answered the boy only after they had stopped to eat. "Everything in the universe evolved," he said, "and for wise men, gold is the metal that evolved the furthest. Don't ask me why. I don't know why. I just know that the tradition is always right. Men have never understood the word of the wise. So gold, instead of being seen as a symbol of evolution, has become the basis for conflict." "There are many languages spoken by things," the boy said. "There was a time for me when a camel's whinnying was nothing more than whinnying. Then it became a signal of danger, and finally it became just a whinny again." But then he stopped. The alchemist probably knew all that. "I have known true alchemists," the alchemist continued. "They lock themselves in their laboratories and try to evolve, as gold had, and they had found the philosopher's stone because they understood that when something evolves, everything around it evolves as well. Others stumbled upon the stone by accident. They already had the gift, and their souls were readier for such things than souls of others. But they don't count. They're quite rare. And then there were others who were interested only in gold. They had never found the secret. They forgot that lead, copper, iron have their own destinies to fulfill, and anyone who interferes with the destiny of another never will discover his own." The alchemist's words echoed like a curse. He reached over and picked up a shell from the ground. "This desert was once a sea," he said. "I noticed that," the boy answered. The alchemist told the boy to place the shell over his ear. He had done that many times when he was a child and had heard the sounds of the sea. "The sea has once lived on in this shell because that's its destiny, and it will never cease doing so until the desert is once again covered by water." They mounted their horses and rode out in the direction of the pyramids of Egypt. The sun was setting when the boy's heart sounded a danger signal. They were surrounded by gigantic dunes, and the boy looked at the alchemist to see whether he had sensed anything, but he appeared to be unaware of any danger. 5 minutes later, the boy saw 2 horsemen awaiting ahead of them. Before he could say anything to the alchemist, the 2 horsemen had become 10, and then 100, and then they were everywhere in the dunes. They were tribesmen dressed in blue with black rings surrounding their turbans. Their faces were hidden behind blue veils, with only their eyes showing. Even from a distance, their eyes conveyed the strength of their souls, and their eyes spoke of death. The 2 were taken to a nearby military camp. A soldier shoved the boy and the alchemist into a tent where the chief was holding a meeting with his staff. "These are the spies," said one of the men. "We're just travelers," the alchemist answered. "You were seen at the enemy camp 3 days ago, and you were talking with one of the troops there." "I'm just a man who wanders the desert and knows the stars," said the alchemist. I have no information about troops or about the movement of the tribes. I was simply acting as a guide for my friend here. Who is your friend? The chief asked. An alchemist, said the alchemist. He understands the forces of nature, and he wants to show you his extraordinary powers. The boy listened quietly and fearfully. What is the foreigner doing here? Asked another of the men. He has brought money to give your tribe, said the alchemist, before the boy could say a word, and seizing the boy's bag, the alchemist gave the gold coins to the chief. The Arab accepted them without a word. There was enough there to buy a lot of weapons. What is an alchemist? He asked finally. It is a man who understands nature and the world. If he wanted to, he could destroy this camp with just the force of the wind. The men laughed. They were used to the ravages of war and knew the wind could not deliver the fatal blow. Yet each felt his heart beat a little faster. They were men of the desert, and they were fearful of sorcerers. I want to see him do it, said the chief. He needs 3 days, answered the alchemist. He is going to transform himself into the wind, just to demonstrate his powers. If he can do so, we humbly offer you our lives, for the honor of your tribe. You can't offer me something that is already mine, the chief said arrogantly, but he granted the travelers 3 days. The boy was shaking with fear, but the alchemist helped him out of the tent. Don't let them see you afraid, the alchemist said. They are brave men, and they despise cowards. But the boy couldn't even speak. He was able to do so only after he had walked through the center of the camp. There was no need to imprison them. The Arabs simply confiscated their horses. So once again, the world had demonstrated its many languages. The desert, only moments ago, had been endless and free, and now it was an impenetrable wall. You gave them everything I had, the boy said, everything I saved in my entire life. Well, what's good would it be to you if you had to die, the alchemist answered. Your money saved us for 3 days. It's not often that money saves a person's life. But the boy was too frightened to listen to the words of wisdom. He had no idea how he was going to transform himself into the wind. He wasn't an alchemist. The alchemist asked one of the soldiers for some tea and poured some on the boy's wrists. A wave of relief washed over him, and the alchemist muttered some words that the boy didn't understand. Don't give in to your fears, said the alchemist in a strange, gentle voice. If you do, you won't be able to talk to your heart. But I have no idea how to turn myself into the wind. If a person is living out his destiny, he knows everything he needs to know. There is only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve: the fear of failure. I'm not afraid of failing. It's just, I don't know how to turn myself into the wind. Well, you'll have to learn. Your life depends on it. But what if I can't? Then you'll die in the midst of trying to realize your destiny. That's a lot better than dying like millions of other people who never knew what their destinies were. But don't worry, the alchemist continued. Usually the threat of death makes people a lot more aware of their lives. The first day passed. There was a major battle nearby, and a number of wounded were brought back to the camp. The dead soldiers were replaced by others, and life went on. Death doesn't change anything, the boy thought. You could have died later on, a soldier said to the body of one of his companions. You could have died after peace had been declared. But in any case, you were going to die. At the end of the day, the boy went looking for the alchemist, who had taken his falcon out into the desert. I still have no idea how to turn myself into the wind, the boy repeated. Remember what I have told you. The world is the only visible aspect of God, and that is what alchemy does, is bring spiritual perfection into contact with the material plane. What are you doing? Feeding my falcon. If I'm not able to turn myself in the wind, then we're going to die, the boy said. Why feed your falcon? You're the one who may die, the alchemist said. I already know how to turn myself into the wind. On the second day, the boy climbed to the top of a cliff near the camp. The sentinels allowed him to go. They had already heard about the sorcerer who can turn himself into the wind, and they didn't want to go near him. In any case, the desert was impassable. He spent the entire afternoon of the second day looking over the desert and listening to his heart. The boy knew the desert sensed his fear. They both spoke the same language. On the third day, the chief met with his officers. He called the alchemist to the meeting and said, Let's go see the boy who turns himself into the wind. Let's, the alchemist answered. The boy took them to the cliff where he had been on the previous day. He told them all to be seated. It's going to take a while, the boy said. We're in no hurry, the chief answered. We are men of the desert. The boy looked out to the horizon. There were mountains in the distance, and there were dunes and rocks and plants that insisted on living where survival seemed impossible. There was the desert that he had wandered for so many months. Despite all that came, he knew only a small part of it. Within the small part, he had found an Englishman, caravans, tribal wars, and an oasis with 50,000 palm trees and 300 wells. What do you want here today? The desert asked him. Didn't you spend enough time looking at me yesterday? Somewhere you're holding the person I love, the boy said. So when I look over your sands, I'm also looking at her. I want to return to her, and I need your help so I can turn myself into the wind. What is love? The desert asked. Love is the falcon's flight over your sands, because for him, you are a green field from which he always returns with game. He knows your rocks, your dunes, your mountains, and you're generous to him. The falcon's beak carries bits of myself, the desert said. For years I cared for his game, feeding it with little water I have, then showing him where the game is. And one day, as I enjoy the fact that his game thrives on my surface, the falcon dives from the sky and takes away what I have created. But that's why you created the game in the first place, the boy answered, to nourish the falcon. And the falcon then nourishes man, and eventually man will nourish your sands, where the game will once again flourish. That's how the world goes. So is that what love is? Yes, that's what love is. It makes the game become the falcon, and the falcon become a man, and the man in his turn the desert. It's what turns lead into gold and makes gold return to the earth. I don't understand what you're talking about, the desert said. But you can at least understand that somewhere in your sands there is a woman waiting for me, and that's why I have to turn myself into the wind. The desert didn't answer him for a few moments. Then it told him, I'll give you my sand to help the wind to blow, but alone I can't do anything. You have to ask for help from the wind. A breeze began to blow. The tribesmen watched the boy, from a distance, talking amongst themselves in a language that the boy couldn't understand. The alchemist smiled. The wind approached the boy and touched his face. It knew of the boy's talk with the desert because the wind knows everything. They blow across the world without a birthplace and with no place to die. Help me, the boy said. One day you carried the voice of my loved one to me. Who's taught you to speak the language of the desert and the wind? My heart, the boy answered. The wind has many names. In the part of the world it was called Sirocco because it brought moisture from the oceans to the east. In the distant land the boy came from, they called it Levanter because they believe it brought with it sands of the desert and the screams of the Moorish wars. Perhaps, but in place beyond pastures where sheep live, men thought the wind came from Andalusia, but actually the wind came from no place at all, nor did it go any place. That's why it was stronger than the desert. Someone might one day plant trees in the desert and even raise sheep there, but never would they harness the wind. You can't be the wind said. We're two very different things. That's not true, the boy said. I learned the alchemist's secrets in my travels. I have inside me the wind, the desert, the oceans, the stars, and everything created in the universe. We were all made of the same hands. We all have the same soul. I want to be like you, able to reach every corner of the world, cross the seas, blow away the sands that cover my treasure, and carry the voice of the woman that I love. I heard that you were talking about the other day with the alchemist, the wind said. He said that everything has its own destiny, but people can't turn themselves into the wind. Just teach me to be the wind for a few moments, the boy said, so you and I can talk about the limitless possibility of the people and winds. The wind's curiosity was aroused in something that had never happened before. It wanted to talk about those things, but it didn't know how to turn a man into wind. And look how many things the wind already knew how to do. It created deserts, sank ships, felled entire forests, and blew through cities, filled with strange music and strange noises. It felt that it had no limits, yet here was a boy saying that there were other things the wind should be able to do. This is what we call love, the boy said, seeing the wind was close to granting what he requested. When you are loved, you can do anything in creation. When you're loved, there's no need at all to understand what's happening because everything happens within you. And even men can turn themselves into the wind as long as the wind helps, of course. The wind was a proud being, and it was becoming irritated with the boy was saying. It commenced to blow harder, raising the desert sands, but it finally had to recognize that even in making its way around the world, it didn't know how to turn a man into wind, and it knew nothing about love. In my travels around the world, I often see people speaking of love and looking towards the heavens, the wind said, furious having knowledge of its own limitations. Maybe it's okay to ask heaven. Well, then help me do that, the boy said. Fill this place with a sandstorm so strong that it blots out the sun. Then I can look to heaven without blinding myself. So the wind blew with all its strength, and the sky was filled with sand. The sun was turning into a golden disk. At the camp, it was difficult to see anything. The men of the desert were already familiar with the wind. They called it the simoom, and it was worse than the storm at sea. Their horses cried out, and all their weapons were filled with sand. In the heights, one of the commanders turned to the chief and said, Maybe we better end this. They could barely see the boy. Their faces were covered with blue cloths, and their eyes showed fear. Let's stop this, said another commander said. I want to see the greatness of Allah, the chief said with respect. I want to see how a man turns himself into the wind. But he made a mental note of the names of the two men who had expressed their fear. As soon as the wind stopped, he was going to remove them from their commands, because true men of the desert were not afraid. The wind told me that you know about love, the boy said to the sun. If you know about love, then you must also know about the soul of the world, because it's made of love. From where I am, the sun said, I can see the soul of the world. It communicates with my soul, and together we cause the plants to grow and the sheep to seek out shade. It's from where I am, and I am a long way from the earth. I learned how to love, and now that if I ever even a bit closer to the earth, everything there would die, and the soul of the world would no longer exist. So we contemplate each other and we want each other, and I give it life and warmth, and it gives me my reason for living."
"So you know about love," the boy said.
"And I know the soul of the world, because we have talked great lengths to each other during this endless trip through the universe. It tells me its greatest problem is, up until now, only the minerals and the vegetables could understand that all things are one, that there is no need for iron to be the same as copper, and copper the same as gold. Each performs its own function as a unique being, and everything would be a symphony of peace if the hands that wrote all of this had stopped on the fifth day of creation."
"But there was a sixth day," the sun went on. "You are wise because you observe everything from a distance," the boy said. "But you don't know about love. If there hadn't been a sixth day, man would not exist. Copper would just be copper, and lead just lead. It's true that everything has its destiny, but one day that destiny will be realized. So each thing has to transform itself into something better and acquire a new destiny until someday the soul of the world becomes one thing only." The sun thought about it and decided to shine more brightly. The wind was enjoying the conversation and started to blow with greater force, so that the sun would not blind the boy. "This is what alchemy is. This is why alchemy exists," the boy said, "so that everyone will search for his treasure, find it, and then want to be better than he was in his former life. Lead will play its role until the world has no further need for lead, and then lead will have to turn itself into gold. That's what alchemists do. They show that when we strive to become better than we are, everything around us becomes better too."
"Well, then why did you say that I don't know about love?"
asked the boy. "Because it's not love to be static like the desert, nor is it love to roam the world like wind. And it's not love to see everything from a distance like you. Love is a force that transforms and improves the soul of the world. When I first reached through it, I thought the soul of the world was perfect, but later I could see that, like other aspects of creation, it had its own passions and war. It was we who nourished the soul of the world, and the world we live in will either be better or worse, depending on whether we become better or worse. That's where the power of love comes in, because when we love, we always strive to become better than we are."
"What do you want of me?"
the sun asked. "I want you to help me to turn myself into the wind," the boy answered.
"Nature knows me as the wisest being in creation," the sun said, "but I don't know how to turn you into the wind."
"Then whom should I ask?" The sun thought for a minute. The wind was listening closely and wanted to tell every corner of the world that the sun's wisdom had its limitations, that it was unable to deal with the boy who spoke the language of the world.
"Speak to the hand that wrote it all," said to the sun.
The wind screamed with delight and blew harder than ever. The tents were being blown from their ties to the earth, and the animals were being freed from their tether. On the cliff, men clutched at each other, and they sought to keep from being blown away. The boy turned to the hand that wrote it all. As he did so, he sensed that the universe had fallen silent, and he decided not to speak. A current of love rushed from his heart, and the boy began to pray. It was a prayer that he had never said before, because it was a prayer without words or pleas. His prayer didn't give thanks for his sheep having found new pastures. It didn't ask the boy to be able to sell more crystal, and it didn't beseech that a woman he had met continue to await his return. In the silence, the boy understood that the desert, the wind, the sun were also trying to understand the signs written by the hand, and were seeking to follow their paths and to understand what had been written on a single emerald. He saw that omens were scattered throughout the earth and in space, and there was no reason or significance attached to their appearance. He could see that not the deserts, nor the winds, nor the sun, nor the people knew why they had been created. But the hand had a reason for all this, that only the hand could perform miracles, transform the sea into a desert, or a man into the wind, because only the hand understood it was a larger design that had moved the universe to a point at which 6 days of creation had evolved into a master work. The boy reached through the soul of the world and saw it was a part of the soul of God. And he saw that the soul of God was his own soul, and he, a boy, could perform miracles. The Simum blew that day as it had never blown before. For generations thereafter, the Arabs recounted the legend of the boy who had turned himself into the wind, almost destroying a military camp in defiance of the most powerful chief in the desert. When the Simum ceased to blow, everyone looked at the place where the boy had been, but he was no longer there. He was standing next to a sand-covered sentinel on the far side of the camp. The men were terrified of his sorcery, but there were two people who were smiling: the alchemist, because he had found his perfect disciple, and the chief, because that disciple had understood the glory of God. The following day, the general bade the boy and the alchemist farewell, and provided them with an escort party to accompany them as far as they chose. They rode for an entire day. Towards the end of the afternoon, they came upon a Coptic monastery. The alchemist dismounted and told the escorts they could return to camp. "From here on, you will be alone," the alchemist said. "You are only 3 hours from the pyramids." "Thank you," said the boy. "You taught me the language of the world. I only invoked what you already knew." The alchemist knocked on the gate of the monastery. A monk dressed in black came to the gates. They spoke for a few moments in the Coptic language, and the alchemist bade the boy enter. "I asked them to let me use the kitchen for a while," the alchemist smiled. They went into the kitchen at the back of the monastery, and the alchemist lighted the fire, and the monk brought him some lead, which the alchemist placed into an iron pan. When the lead had become liquid, the alchemist took from his pouch the strange yellow egg. He scraped from it a sliver as thin as hair, wrapped it in wax, and added it to the pan which the lead had melted. The mixture took on a reddish color, almost the color of blood. The alchemist removed the pan from the fire and set it aside to cool. As he did, he talked with the monks about the tribal wars. "I think they're going to last for a long time," he said to the monk. The monk was irritated, and the caravans had stopped at Giza for some time, waiting for the wars to end. "The God's will be done," the monk said. "Exactly," answered the alchemist. When the pan had cooled, the monk and the boy looked at it, dazzled. The lead had dried into the shape of a pan, but it was no longer lead. It was gold. "Will I learn to do that some day?" the boy asked. "This is my destiny, not yours," the alchemist said. "But I wanted to show you that it was possible." They returned to the gates of the monastery. There the alchemist separated the disc into 4 parts. "This is for you," he said, holding one part out to the monk. "It is for your generosity to the pilgrims." "But this payment goes well beyond my generosity," the monk responded. "Don't say that again. Life might be listening and give you less next time." The alchemist turned to the boy. "This is for you to make up for what you gave to the general." The boy was about to say that it was much more than he had given to the general, but he kept quiet, because he had heard what the alchemist said to the monk. "And this one is for me," the alchemist said, keeping one of the parts, "because I have to return to the desert, where the tribal wars are." He took a 4th part and handed it to the monk. "This is for the boy if he ever needs it." "But I'm going in search of my treasure," the boy said. "I'm very close now." "And I'm certain you will find it." "Then why this?" "Because you have already lost your savings twice. Once to the thief, once to the general. I'm an old, superstitious Arab, and I believe in our proverbs. There's one that says, everything happens once can never happen again. but everything that happens twice will surely happen a third time." They mounted their horses. "I want to tell you a story about dreams," said the alchemist. The boy brought his horse closer. "In ancient Rome, at the time of Emperor Tiberius, there lived a good man who had two sons. One was in the military and had been sent to the most distant regions of the empire. The other son was a poet and delighted all of Rome with his beautiful verses. One night the father had a dream. An angel appeared to him and told him that the words of one of his sons would be learned and repeated throughout the world for all generations to come. The father woke from his dream, grateful and crying because life was generous, and had revealed to him something many fathers would be proud to know. Shortly thereafter, the father died as he tried to save a child who was about to be crushed by the wheels of a chariot. Since he had lived his entire life in a manner that was correct and fair, he went directly to heaven, where he met an angel that had appeared in his dream. You were always a good man, the angel said to him. You lived your life in a loving way and died with dignity. Now I can grant you any wish you desire. Life was good to me, the man said. When you appeared in my dream, I felt that my efforts had been rewarded because my son's poems would be read for generations to come. I don't want anything for myself, but any father would be proud of fame achieved by one whom he cared for as a child and educated as he grew up. Sometime in the distant future, I would like to see my son's words. The angels touched the man's shoulder, and they were both projected far into the future. They were in an immense setting, surrounded by thousands of people speaking a strange language. The man wept with happiness. I knew my son's poems were immortal, he said to the angel through his tears. Can you please tell me which of my son's poems these people are repeating? The angel came closer to the man. With tenderness led him to a bench nearby, where they sat down. The verses of your son, who was a poet, were very popular in Rome, the angel said. Everyone loved them and enjoyed them. But when the reign of Tiberius ended, his poems were forgotten, and the words you are now hearing are those of your son in the military. The man looked at the angel with surprise. Your son went to serve at a distant place and became a centurion. He was just and good. One afternoon, one of his servants fell ill, and it appeared that he would die. Your son heard of a rabbi who was able to cure illness, and he rode out for days and days in search of this man. Along the way, he learned the man that he was seeking was the Son of God. He met others who had been cured by him, and they instructed your son of the man's teachings. And so, despite the fact that he was a Roman centurion, he was converted to their faith. Shortly thereafter, he reached a place where the man he was looking for was visiting. He told that man that one of his servants was gravely ill, and that a rabbi made ready to go to his house with him. But the centurion was a man of faith, and looking into the eyes of the rabbi, he knew that he surely was in the presence of the Son of God. And this is what your son said, the angel told the man. These are the words that he said to the rabbi at that point, and they have never been forgotten. My lord, I am not worthy that you should come under my roof, but only speak a word, and my servant will be healed. The alchemist said, no matter what he does, every person on earth plays a central role in the history of the world, and normally he doesn't know it. The boy smiled. He had never imagined that the questions of life would be of such importance to a shepherd. Goodbye, the alchemist said. Goodbye, said the boy. The boy rode along through the desert for several hours, listening avidly to what his heart had to say. It was his heart that would tell him where his treasure was hidden. Where your treasure is, there also will be your heart, the alchemist had told him. But his heart was speaking of other things. With pride, it told the story of the shepherd who had left his flock to follow a dream. he had on two different occasions. It told of destiny and of the many men who had wandered in search of distant lands, or beautiful women, confronting the people of their times with their preconceived notions. It spoke of journeys and discoveries and books and change. He was about to climb yet another dune, and his heart whispered, "Be aware of the place where you are brought to tears. That's where I am. That's where your treasure is." The boy climbed the dune slowly. A full moon rose again in the starry sky. It had been a month since he had set forth from the oasis. The moonlight cast shadows through the dunes, creating an appearance of a rolling sea. It reminded the boy of the day when the horse had reared in the desert, and he had come to know the alchemist. And the moon fell on the desert silence and on a man's journey in search of treasure. When he reached the top of the dune, his heart leapt. There, illuminated by the light of the moon and the brightness of the desert, stood the solemn and majestic pyramids of Egypt. The boy fell to his knees and wept. He thanked God for making him believe in his destiny, and for leading him to meet a king, a merchant, an Englishman, and an alchemist, and above all, for his having met a woman in the desert who told him that love would never keep a man from his destiny. If he wanted to, he could now return to the oasis, go back to Fatima and his life as a simple shepherd. After all, the alchemist continued to live in the desert, even though he understood the language of the world and knew how to transform lead into gold. He didn't need to demonstrate his science and art anymore. The boy told himself that on the way towards realizing his own destiny, he had learned all he needed to know and had experienced everything he might have dreamed of. But there he was, at the point of finding his treasure, and he reminded himself that no project is completed until its objective had been achieved. The boy looked at the sands around him and saw, where his tears had fallen, a scarab beetle were scuttling through the sand. During his time in the desert, he had learned that, in Egypt, scarab beetles were a symbol of God. Another omen! The boy began to dig into the dune, and as he did, he thought of what the crystal merchant had once said, that anyone could build a pyramid in his backyard. The boy could see now that he couldn't do so if he placed stone upon stone upon stone for the rest of his life. Throughout the night, the boy dug at the place he had chosen, but found nothing. He felt weighted down by the centuries of time since the pyramid had been built, but he didn't stop. He struggled to continue digging as he fought the wind, which often blew the sand back into the excavation. His hands were abraded and exhausted, but he listened to his heart. It had told him to dig where his tears fell. As he attempted to pull the rocks, he heard footsteps. Several figures approached him. Their backs were to the moonlight, and the boy could see neither their eyes nor their faces. "What are you doing here?" one of the figures demanded. Because he was terrified, the boy didn't answer. He had found where his treasure was and was frightened at what might happen. "We're refugees from tribal wars, and we need money," the other figure said. "What are you hiding here?" "I'm not hiding anything," the boy answered. But one of them seized the boy's bag and yanked him back out of the hole. Another who was searching the bag found the piece of gold. "There's gold here," he said. The moon shone on the face of the Arab who had seen him, and in the man's eyes the boy saw death. "He's probably got more gold hidden in the ground." They made the boy continue digging, but he found nothing. As the sun rose, the men began to beat the boy. He was bruised and bleeding. His clothes were torn into shreds. He felt that death was near. "What good is money if you are going to die? It's not often that money can save someone's life," the alchemist said. Finally, the boy screamed at the men, "I'm digging for treasure!" And although his mouth was bleeding and swollen, he told his attackers that he had twice dreamed of the hidden treasure near the pyramids. The man who appeared to be the leader of the group spoke to the others. "Leave him. He doesn't have anything else. He must have stolen this gold." The boy fell into the sand, nearly unconscious. The leader shook him. "We're leaving." But before they left, he came back to the boy and said, "You're not going to die. You'll live and you'll learn that a man shouldn't be so stupid. 2 years ago, right here in this spot, I had a recurrent dream. I dreamt that I should travel to the fields of Spain and look for a ruined church where shepherds and their sheep slept. In my dream, there was a sycamore growing out of the rooms of the sacristy, and I was told that if I dug the roots of the sycamore, I would find a hidden treasure. But I'm not so stupid as to cross the entire desert just because of a recurrent dream." And then they disappeared. The boy stood up shakily and looked once more at the pyramid. They seemed to laugh at him, and he laughed back, his heart bursting with joy, because now he knew where his treasure was. Epilogue. The boy reached the small abandoned church just as night was falling. The sycamore was still there in the sacristy, and the stars could still be seen through the half-destroyed roof. He remembered the time he had been there with his sheep. It had been a peaceful night, except for the dream. Now he was here not with his flock, but with a shovel. He sat looking at the sky for a long time. Then he took from his knapsack a bottle of wine and drank some. He remembered the night in the desert when he sat with the alchemist as they looked at the stars and drank wine together. He thought of the many roads he had traveled and the strange way God had chosen to show him his treasure. But if he hadn't, in the significance of the recurrent dreams, he would not have met the gypsy woman, the king, the thief, or, well, that's a long list. But the path was written in the omens. There was no way that I could go wrong, he said to himself. He fell asleep. When he awoke, the sun was already high, and he began to dig at the base of the sycamore. "You old sorcerer," the boy shouted up to the sky. "You know the whole story. You even left a bit of gold at the monastery so I could get back to this church. The monk laughed when he saw me come back in tatters. Couldn't you have saved me from that?" "No," he heard a voice on the wind say. "If I have told you, you wouldn't have seen the pyramids. They're beautiful, aren't they?" The boy smiled and continued digging. Half an hour later, his shovel hit something solid. An hour later, he had before him a chest of Spanish gold coins. There were also precious stones, gold masks adorned with red and white feathers, and stone statues embedded with jewels. The spoils of the conquest that the country had long ago forgotten and that some conquistador had failed to tell his children about. The boy took out Urim and Thummim from his bag. He had used the two stones only once. One morning when he was at the marketplace, his life and his path had always provided him with enough omens. He placed Urim and Thummim in the chest. They were also a part of his new treasure because they were a reminder of the old king, whom he would never see again. It's true, life really is generous to those who pursue their destiny, the boy thought. And when he remembered that he had to get to Tarifa so he could give 1/10 of his treasure to the gypsy woman, as he had promised, those gypsies are really smart, he thought. Maybe it's because they moved around so much. The wind began to blow again. It was the levanter, the wind that came from Africa. It didn't bring with it the smell of the desert nor the threat of Moorish invasion. Instead, it brought the scent of the perfume he knew well, and the touch of a kiss that came from far away. Slowly, slowly until it rested on his lips. The boy smiled. It was the first time she had done that. "I'm coming, Fatima," he said. End of The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho.